Hello and welcome to Distant Not Disengaged today. We're so excited to see you. We've been on hiatus for a month from our weekly series, so it's fantastic to have both new and old faces here with us today. We just want to acknowledge that over the course of COVID, we presented this every week. It's a chance to connect with each other as well as with interesting ideas. Just as the room's filling up, we're going to probably get the program really started in about 3 or 4 minutes. So we use this time to sort of give you some background on the program and also to warm up your own typing fingers. So warm them up. I'm going to ask you a question because today we're here to talk about COVID-19 and the future of democracy. So let's start with, what does democracy mean to you? What's your definition of democracy? Just as a way to sort of ground us in the conversation this morning and to get us started. So think about what it means. Go ahead and throw it in a chat. Maybe it's, maybe it just feels really big. Feel free to write that. Maybe you have a definition that you've thought about. What does it look like? How do you know when it's showing up? That sort of thing. So go ahead and find where that chat is, find your keyboard, share those thoughts with us. Curious, who's gonna be brave and go first as we start to get started? Just as more and more folks join us today, it's a nice way to think about why we all showed up today. If that still feels like a really hard question, go ahead and just think of anything else of where it's showing up. Maybe why you came today. Maybe you don't know what democracy means, and that's what you want to share. Thank you, Rowan. So decision-making of and by the people. That's the meaning of democracy. So again, just as more folks fill the room, thank you, Lila. Democracy is people and power and politics. So again, we're all here for a conversation on COVID-19 and the future of democracy. Thank you all for joining us. We're just letting everyone fill the room. As we wait, we'd like to know kind of why you're here today, or what democracy might mean to you and what comes up. Maybe it's a moment during COVID that's inspired you to show up today. So feel free to share that in the chat. Thank you, Mark. Groups of people making decisions as equals. That's a great idea in those things. Supporting and sharing info to empower folks in the community. Max, could you advance the slide? Because we have such a fantastic graphic that Public Square helped us with today, just to get us grounded in our topic today. So COVID-19, the future of democracy. Democracy is an aspirational ideology for having a better, more equal society and afford people better chances in life, more chances in life. I love the word aspirational in there, so thank you. Today, we also have closed captioning available for all of our plenary audio. We'd like to thank AI Media for partnering with us to offer this service. Captions should automatically be appearing at the bottom of your screen. If they aren't, make sure you hit the button on the bottom right called closed captioning, which will turn this setting on. You may also click the link that's in the chat that our chat captains are going to throw in there for you. I'd also like everyone to be aware, because it may affect your decisions on whether you want to be on screen or off screen, that we are going to record the plenary conversation. We've had lots of interest about, I can't make it for one reason or another, but I want to hear the important ideas. So we will be recording it and making it available. So feel free to turn off your video, things like that. But also know that it's only going to be really centered on our panelists. We will not be recording or sharing any of the side conversations or anything like that. Glenda, lovely. Everyone is valued and included in the decision making. That's what democracy means to you. That is absolutely lovely. So it's great. Again, thank you all for joining us. We have a few more folks just straggling in, which is great. And they're gonna keep coming, I sense, in the next few minutes, but I would love to get us started in today. So again, thank you all for joining us for COVID-19 and the future of democracy. We have a lovely panel conversation. And we also have a room full of facilitators to guide you in a breakout conversation where you can reflect on what we talk about today for a few minutes before we wrap up. So who's here? Yes, you're right, Max. Max is my lovely right hand today. She's helping me with the slide deck, so I don't have to do everything all at once. So thank you, Max. So my name is Jennifer Wolowick, and I'm the project manager for the Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue's Democracy Portfolio, where we look to identify and strengthen the ways in which our democracy can serve each of us better. And to help ground us as well, when I think of democracy, I think about us as people and feeling like we can be part of the decisions and the decision-making systems that we choose to be a part of. Maybe we don't want to be part of everything, but we want to be part of the ones that matter to us. How do we help that? How do we feel that? So for me, it's really people first and not necessarily institutions. I am more than delighted to be joined by Sabrina Dellin, the Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue's Open Democracy Fellow. Sabrina, can I pass it to you, and would you like to introduce yourself and lead us into a land acknowledgement?
You bet. Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sabrina Dellin, and I'm the Open Democracy Fellow with SFU, Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue, Open Democracy Project, and Massey College, which is where I'm speaking to you from today. I wish to acknowledge that this land, which Massey College operates on, has for thousands of years been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land.
Thank you, Sabrina. I also want to acknowledge that I am sitting on the unceded territories of the Kakite, Musqueam, and Coast Salish peoples. For me, land acknowledgements are a moment to reflect on what we know and what we don't know about our histories and the histories of our land and its people. Today, it is also a moment to recognize the ways in which the facts that the way we organize ourselves are invented, and that democracy is invented, what it looks like is invented, and that has changed throughout time. It's also for us in this moment to think about who is here with us today. As you scroll through all the images of faces on your Zoom, who's here? And more importantly, who isn't? So take a look around and make note of that. As Sabrina and I were thinking about the session and designing it, we really wanted it to be a time when you all could hear from people you might not normally think of when you think of democracy, or whose work you might not know about. It's a moment to learn and respect the fantastic work that people are doing in communities and the movements they're creating, and learn from our fantastic speakers about their lessons learned and what that could mean for the future of our democracy. So keep all those thoughts in mind as we talk about what we've learned, and especially COVID-19 and the future of our democracy. Slide, please. To hold this conversation well, we do want to remind you of our community guidelines. Basically, to summarize, lean into listening today. Recognize our panelists and those you might encounter in breakout rooms at the end of our session are experts in their own experiences. We have a moment right now together for the next hour to listen and hear others, rather than focus on ourselves. In just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to Sabrina to lead and introduce our panelists and really host our conversation. So feel free to post questions in the chat as they talk. We'll keep an eye and ask them as we can. We will then disperse after their chat, probably around 12:45, 12:50, into breakout rooms for 15 minutes, where our wonderful facilitators will ask you to share, what did you hear that inspires you? What are you going to take away into your own life or into your own work? And then throughout our panel, we also have, as a surprise, a graphic facilitator, Adriana. Adriana, can you wave? So folks can find you and say hi to that. So throughout our whole panel, Adriana is actually going to be taking words and turning them into images. And so when we come back from our breakouts, we'll get to see kind of what she's captured for us. We're also going to share that image with all of you as an email after the event. So I'm very excited to see what comes up. I'm excited to learn from all our panelists. I'm also really excited to hear what you all have to say in our breakout rooms. So Sabrina, as I pass it over to you now, can I ask everyone to turn off their video screens except our panelists? That allows us to really center on them. So just go ahead and click off on your video if you haven't done so already. I'm also going to do the same. And Sabrina, over to you.
Thanks, Jen. So let's get to our guests now. I'll introduce them in turn, starting with Sandeep. Sandeep Johil's art practice is an expression of her social and cultural concerns, particularly gender justice. Sandeep is the 2019 recipient of the Darpan Magazine's Artistic Visionary Award and has worked with the Vancouver Art Gallery, Burrard Arts Foundation, and Vancouver Mural Festival. Welcome, Sandeep. Walid Kogali has served as the president of the Toronto Environmental Alliance. He is a founding member of the transit advocacy organization TTC Riders and the co-founder of the Coalition Against White Supremacy and Islamophobia. He has also been a key part of the Canadian Arab Federation and One Toronto. His recent work supports at-risk youth and families across the Greater Toronto Area through the Ramadan Meals TO project, which we'll hear about more today. Welcome, Walid. Claire Bechtel is a former senior executive, entrepreneur, author, sought-after speaker, mentor, and coach. She's an advocate for diversity, inclusion, and women's leadership, and also a visionary for the Prosperity Project, which we'll learn more about. Welcome, Claire. And Lila Williamson is a 16-year-old high school student on her break between classes joining us today. She is a climate activist and organizer with Sustainability Teens and Climate Strike Canada. Welcome, Lila. So thank you all for making the time to join us for this discussion today. I'm going to jump right in with our first discussion question. So we know that we're all navigating the global pandemic in different ways. I would love to hear from you, and the group here would too. What are some key insights about how you've mobilized during this time? Claire, could you get us started?
Sure, I would love to do that. Well, many of you may know Pamela Jeffrey, who was the organizer and the runner of the Women's Executive Network for many years, which highlighted women and their success. And she approached a group of us in May and began to talk about the challenges, as we all know, facing women as a result of COVID-19, because we know that women are suffering more than others in terms of the pandemic, both from a point of view of losing their jobs, having to give up some of their time on their jobs because of childcare, and of course the stereotyping about who's responsible for home, with children at home from schools all spring and summer. And all of us involved who became visionaries and formed the Prosperity Project have all worked many, many years to make change and wanted to continue to make positive change so that we wouldn't see women going backwards in terms of what was happening out there. So the Prosperity Project was born, and it has basically 4 pillars to it. One is an awareness campaign, which is to bring to everyone the awareness of what is happening with women, and to make sure that they understand there's a real link between prosperity and women. And if women don't prosper, the country doesn't prosper. And there's been a lot of studies that show that. So that was a key component. So there's an awareness campaign, and it'll be something along the lines of, many of you won't remember, but many of you will have heard the Rosie the Riveter campaign during the war or following the war, where women were out there doing the work when there was no longer any men around. And a second part is a monthly poll that looks at the household spending, but within that you find things, and it's done with Polera, and it came out on September 10th, and they find that women had lost their jobs more than men. They'd also taken cut in the hours of their job. And of course, one of our concerns is to make sure that women do not go backwards. And then there's also a long-term study, which is going to look at ways that women can support each other, ways that government and other policymakers can come up with programs that will help women. And then another key element of this is a matching program between experts and nonprofits that are supporting women, to bring them an expertise that they may be lacking because of a lack of funding. They don't have people they can hire. So this will be a match that will help them through the time of the pandemic. So that's essentially what the Prosperity Project is. And what it is now there's more, and it's all volunteer. It's a volunteer nonprofit. And I think it just brings to mind, when we're talking about democracy, how important the NGO sector is to democracy, that sometimes we forget that. So that'll be how I kick it off.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So Waleed, I know that you, like the Prosperity Project, have also built things from the ground up in the midst of the pandemic, especially efforts that are volunteer based. Tell us about your insights about mobilizing over the last few months, and how that relates to some of what Claire was describing.
Sure, I'd love to do that. And you know what, I'm actually was fortunate to track down an infographic that I hope will visually represent the impact. I believe I just sent the infographic to Maxine, so hopefully we'll be able to show that. But the pandemic has been a life-altering event for many of us, especially those that are now designated as essential workers. We are still collecting data to see to evaluate the impact that's had on so many segments of our Canadian family, including racialized members of our community who are deeply impacted, not just economically, but also when it pertains to access to healthcare as well. So the Ramadan Meals project, which is something that I want to focus on, will illustrate the power of community, the power of folks who have basically not just able to problem solve, but are able to also provide leadership in their own communities when it pertains to access to very essential services that we take for granted. You know, the pandemic has just highlighted the need for not just housing, but also food. As many of you might be aware, food insecurity continues to plague members of our community, including mega cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and many other cities around Canada. So the Ramadan Meals program started off as a simple idea. It was my friend Kumsa Baker, my brother Mwanko Gali. We were sitting together and talking about the impact of the pandemic. And one of the things that we realized was that all our places of worship, all our community centers were closed. And folks were in isolation due to travel. Folks were in isolation due to orders from our federal, health professionals who wanted to make sure that everyone is safe. And what we did is we didn't have money. We basically started to fundraise as a community, and we started off small. And we were able to secure a $5,000 grant from Carrot Cachet. And over time, after putting together a GoFundMe page, after getting e-transfers from community members, after showing the need by illustrating the sort of expectations that our community has, through the mainstream media, but also through viral videos, we were able to generate interest to the project. We were able to actually secure so much more partnerships, not just during the month of Ramadan, but also beyond the month of Ramadan. And those partnerships and coalitions continue till today. So what were we able to do through the Ramadan Meals program? We were able to deliver about 10,523 meals, which is phenomenal. That's so many people that have been fed. We were able to support our children, support the kids in our community by also holding at the end of Ramadan an Eid festival, but it had to be done different. And that is, we had to respect the physical distance measures that were put in place to keep us all safe. And what we were able to do is also put a smile on the faces of so many beautiful kids who were stuck away from playgrounds for months. Some folks who've never seen their friends, folks who might have not seen, nature. These are beautiful young children that deserve the best response to a global crisis. And what we were also able to do was also highlight the issue of food insecurity and housing and so many other issues that continue to plague our community. What we also wanted to do is wanted to make sure that this program was sustainable. So what we did is, after we were able to successfully complete the program, we wanted to make sure that the program continues in some version. And what we did is we started a new program called Feed to Heal after securing funding from the Red Cross through the funds made available by the government of Canada. We were able to now feed hundreds of families on the weekend, so every Saturday and Sunday. And our impact continues to grow because we were able to hire at-risk youth. And many of those youth actually love the experiences with Ramadan Meals, where they get to meet their neighbors and better understand the issues that plague our community, but also share their thoughts and their vision of how we can build a better Canada. So the Ramadan Meals program was a success, as you can tell from the infographic, because of collaboration, because of the sacrifice made by many community members, both in time and in resources, to make sure that their neighbors are not forgotten. So that sums up my quick orientation on the Ramadan Meals program and its impact.
Yeah, thanks, Waleed. So I think you raised some important points about the need for community connection, but also how in the pandemic we have to be really creative about how we get that, and digital tools can play a key piece in terms of mobilizing. So Lila, I want to turn to you. What are some thoughts and reflections about mobilizing over the last few months for your work in terms of climate change?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sabrina. And again, my name's Lila. I use she, her pronouns. And just before I start, I want to acknowledge that I'm on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory today in Burnaby. And yeah, I am an organizer with Sustainability Teams and Climate Strike Canada. And we organized all of the climate strikes last year, including the one on September 27th. So just under a year ago, which mobilized over 1 million Canadians across the country. But as a youth movement that really gets our power and really mobilizes people through mass protest and through big public actions, when COVID-19 hit and we were all sent into lockdown, it was definitely really difficult to adjust. And so a lot of us organizers got on many hours of Zoom calls every day and staying in contact and trying to strategize about what we could do in this moment, because while COVID-19 has extremely detrimental impacts all across the board, it's also not happening in isolation of other crises such as climate change and inequality and systemic racism. And so we continue to organize. And what I think we have realized about COVID-19 is that while it has stopped our ability to have massive protests and to bring people out on the street in the numbers that we did on September 27th last year, it also kind of acts as a reset button, and it's really just changed everything and completely flipped everything upside down. And because of that, the way that we rebuild and the way that we recover from this crisis can really re-envision what our society looks like. And we know that it's very broken. We know that we have so many broken systems that need to be dismantled and replaced. And not even just with climate, with so many other issues as well. And so what we realized is that we can really do that in the way that we recover from COVID-19. And so we've been mobilizing people online through things like Zoom calls, and now working on doing distance actions and doing media work and events like these to bring people together and to continue mobilizing people around this issue. And so young people across Canada, as well as sustainability teams in Vancouver, have come together to form the Not Going Back campaign. And so we released a set of demands for Prime Minister Trudeau's throne speech on September 23rd. And we wanted that speech to prioritize investing in people and not in corporations, and tackling inequality, dismantling systemic racism and colonialism, and treating the climate crisis like the emergency that it is. And especially on that last point, I know here in Vancouver, we've been surrounded by wildfire smoke for the past few weeks, and it's just starting to clear, but could really just feel in the air we were breathing how our government's inaction on climate change is impacting us today. And so we started pushing those demands for the throne speech. And it was definitely disappointing to see that the speech yesterday was really just a continuation of what's already being done by the Liberal government. And there's really just not a lot of action to show there already, but we're going to continue pushing for these demands to be included in the budget and in plans going forward. And so we are having another day of action tomorrow on September 25th, a year since the September 27th climate strike. And we're mobilizing people both online through social media and also in the street through distance and COVID-safe actions and disruptive actions all across the country.
That's incredible. So Sandeep, that makes me think about how artists play such a key role in capturing and synthesizing, the energy that we've heard from our speakers so far, and also, kind of manifesting the frustration, but also the hope in different forms, artwork and different types of creative responses. So what are your thoughts about what we've heard so far and how that relates to your experiences over the last few months?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think artists are built for the pandemic. They're like work in isolation. And, we use our art practice as a way to question and investigate and express our own feelings and thoughts and emotions around like a wide variety of topics. And a lot of my work is around storytelling. It's around telling the stories of women who are no longer here to speak for themselves. And so, with the work that I do, I think it can be very painful at times, but ultimately, if I didn't have hope that things could change, then there would be no point in me doing what I do. And so I think during the pandemic, it's given me a lot of time to really reflect on, like, what is my role as an artist? What's my role as a woman of color? You know, with the BLM movement, how do I connect with more Black artists, Indigenous artists, other artists of color? How do we make sure that we're supporting each other? You know, during COVID, I just spent a lot of time drawing just to kind of process my feelings and emotions around what was happening. And I was really fortunate to take part in Van Mero Fest's initiative, Make Art While Apart. So they hit up 4 different neighborhoods with all of the boarded up businesses and hired about 60 or more artists, muralists, to come and just paint those boarded up storefronts. And it completely transformed the space from this like depressing, apocalyptic doom space to this beautiful open air art gallery. And I think, you know, in times like this, it's really important to understand how much art matters and how much art can heal folks, how much art can transform spaces, uplift spirits, create joy, resilience, all of those things. You know, murals are a huge part of my practice, and I see the ways they transform space and they change neighborhoods and they affect people and they resonate with people. And yeah, so I mean, I've been super inspired by all of the artists who have pivoted and have been so generous with their time and their practices in giving people, you know, work that they can use, coloring sheets, writers who are doing free story times for children. My son and I watched a story time every day by this one writer. He started a book club during the pandemic. It was amazing. And just, yeah, the generosity of spirit of artists has been just really, really uplifting.
Yeah, I was doing those Wendy Mack drawing classes
Oh,
with
yeah.
my daughter, which was kind of, you know, a huge deal that suddenly tons of kids from around the world are all drawing together at the same time, and like, you know, that they can be together and creative in one way or another. So yeah, I can completely appreciate that. So your thoughts and reflections from all of you, you know, you're touching on structural constraints, policy ones, culture shifts that you're trying to advance, and none of you seem to be in the doom space that Sandeep just mentioned that, you know, is always close at hand, unfortunately within the last few months. So from within your respective areas, tell me, why is it important to organize from your specific spaces and places right now? Lila, let's go back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think just whether it's, you know, during the pandemic and COVID-19 or not, I think just organizing and mobilizing youth is so important. And I think definitely the reason that I got involved in climate strike organizing, and I know a lot of other young people that I work with as well, is because youth voices are not listened to and are not heard in politics. And I think obviously we're talking about COVID and democracy here at this event, and I think democracy means listening to young people, because the decisions that our government makes today are going to impact our generation the most. And so I think it's just super important to mobilize young people and to listen to what young people have to say and want to see from their government and from their leaders, because I think that we also just have a different perspective. We just haven't lived in the status quo that we live in for as long. You can see something and imagine something different. And so, and just don't have any of that, you know, like other commitments or other attachments, or that we can just like kind of see straight through and just be like, we're in a climate crisis. Like, we need to tackle systemic inequality. We need to tackle systemic racism. And so I think that's why I personally think that youth activism and youth mobilization is so crucial to democracy and also to all the work we're doing around COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. So Claire, I know with the Prosperity Project, there is a, you know, major substantive wealth of experience and understanding about the lack of support for women over generations. So the throne speech yesterday had a big piece about childcare policy, making that accessible for Canadian women, linking that to economic growth and development. So, and certainly recovery from the pandemic. What are your thoughts on what Lila just said in terms of like for her generation, it's crystal clear what needs to happen next. How does that intersect with the knowledge and experience in the Prosperity Project?
Well, I love the youth energy, and it brought me back to, I'm a 60s child, from growing up as a teenager in the 60s, which was a time of momentous change, Lila, which many of the things you're talking about today, except for climate change, was on the table. We were talking about the racial inequality. We were talking about women's inequality. It was out in the streets, and it was led by young people. But I think it's really important, and I love the youth energy and the movements, to have that intergenerational perspective that we put on things, because there are so many different aspects to every issue. And when you look at the women's issue, it's been going on for a long, long time. And it is multifaceted. Childcare is an important piece, but it's not everything. It is an important piece, but also getting rid of all those stereotypes, looking through intersectionality. As you look at, there's inequality for women, but there's inequality for women who are underrepresented. There's inequality for disabled women, for Indigenous women, that goes even deeper. So you have to think about that. And so it's intergenerational, it's layered. And so when we're thinking about the Prosperity Project, just to give you an example, the in-depth 10-year survey, we need to ensure that we have women from all across the spectrum, to ensure that all of those voices are being heard. And that is important, I think, for any one of these initiatives, is people need to be heard.
Mm-hmm. So Sandeep, I wonder if you can reflect in terms of the arts, how can they help to galvanize and develop a cohesive message, so that everyone that Claire just detailed, people who feel inside and outside of these issues and problems, can all be together? How can arts be part of the solution for that? Because we can't have a social movement without artists.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit it on the head there. Art is always, in tandem with social movements. I remember when I went to Argentina in 2012, I was just really blown away by all of the street art. Buildings were wrapped in art. There was art everywhere. And so we went on a graffiti tour, and they talked about the social and political messages behind the art, and had talked about when they had the big financial crisis, people took to the streets and they started writing their frustrations on big banks, on the walls of big banks and buildings. And then that turned into more slogans, and then messaging, and then murals, and then, works of art expressing people's, frustrations with what was happening in their country and their feelings around it. And so, again, I mean, oftentimes art isn't valued in society. In schools, when a program needs to be cut, arts are the first to go, unfortunately. So I think one of the pivotal things that we need to understand is how important art is, and how art can effect change on multiple levels. For different movements in different countries, different, ages, people can use art to express things and really make some kind of change, and that's what I aim to do with my work, is just make work that's really meaningful and really impactful, and, gives people the confidence to create work that does that as well, and, talk about those important things that people don't want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. So Walid, in your efforts, you've had really great success in terms of getting people to have a feeling of connection. And you've reflected previously, when we've talked about the change in energy over the pandemic, that people who might have maybe opted out of getting involved with organizing are now really in a different way, and you've really been able to seize that energy. Can you reflect on that for us?
Yes, I think what I'll start off by saying is, you never let a good crisis go to waste. And the pandemic is a crisis that provides all of us with opportunities. And I, first of all, want to acknowledge that our youth have been pivotal in pushing for change as part of the counterculture movements or the social movements, whether it's related to the environment, whether it's related to transit, whether it's related to user fees for public services. They're pushed the reasonable expectation that people in poverty, especially students, should not be treated as cash cows. So I want to, appreciate my sister Leela for, being part of that amazing movement to raise awareness, not just amongst youth, but amongst members of the public in general. The other reason why people got involved is because they could not wait. They could not wait. There was no one else to help them during the pandemic. Let's not forget, in early 2020, many of our support services were shut down. All our schools were shut down. Everything was shut down. So people had to come together in a creative way, find solutions that will meet our needs, and also to challenge those that are responsible for making sure that our democratic process actually listens to the most marginalized, to the folks who actually disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. And what we also realized as a community was we had projects that were underway. In Regent Park, for example, where there's been a multi-billion-dollar investment in revitalization, which has led to gentrification of our community. We were pushing for actual community benefits that work for us. Specifically, we wanted hard targets to make sure that our youth and folks who are marginalized in our community get the good jobs. We wanted to make sure there's a pathway to home ownership. And we realized that a lot of our community members didn't even have access to financial literacy. So we had to start with the basics, right? To bring them to the level of awareness that they're able to actually have an impact, not just in their own lives, but in our community. And what we also realized was that many of our youth, their voices were ignored. And we wanted to make sure that the voices of our youth and other marginalized members of our community, especially women, who I wish were in more leadership positions, in my opinion. I'm a feminist. I'm big supporter of women, holding positions of responsibility. And I'll tell you why. They do a great job. They do a phenomenal job being empathetic and listening to the needs of the community. And I wish, we are much more intentional in bringing about the actual movers and shakers in our community to the forefront of positions of leadership, so they could influence policy and influence the systemic practices that continue to marginalize and disproportionately affect Black, Indigenous, and racialized members of our community.
Thank you, Waleed. I'm going to just pop in with a question here, because what you're saying is prompting up lots of amazing thoughts, especially around making room in our social movements for those who it A, most affects the most, or B, are not represented in our systems, to really take a step forward. So I'm wondering for you, what does it, and all of you to answer this question, what does it look like from your experience to be intentional about that practice? Waleed, you were starting to go there, but I would also like to hear from everyone else too around what does it look like to be intentional for those of us who are listening and can think about as we take it back to our own work and our own lives. So again, I'll pose it again. What does it look like to be intentional?
Excellent question. I think it's being focused on accessibility, one primary prerequisite. And I'll tell you why. Many folks don't have resources to be able to access spaces or access opportunities for leadership, or even get the support from the institutional sort of organizations that do this work across the country or in the province, but have no clue about the type of work that's been done in our communities to address poverty or to address climate change, for example. And I think it's crucial for us to actually do an environmental scan. If you're a policymaker, if you're a leader, find out who's doing work in the community, gain their trust, and then try to support our youth, women, folks who are marginalized systemically. Get them access to resources, to opportunities, to be able to influence policy. And the way we go about doing it is through integrity, right? Like, it's about doing your work with integrity. So if you're a decision maker or a policy maker, have you done that environmental scan? Have you connected with those individuals or groups that do this work in their local community? How are you not getting in the way, right? How are you actually helping amplify the work? how are you sharing their stories to encourage and motivate others to take action as part of our counterculture movements, whether they're women, whether they're racialized, whatever the case? And how do we center their experiences as part of the broader dialogue about systemic change?
Sandeep, I'm interested in your thoughts in that, particularly from the arts world, which has a very complicated history in terms of high art and low art and what is valuable and what isn't. What are your thoughts on that in terms of intentionality and inclusion too?
Yeah, I mean, for me, everything always comes down to access. Do people have access? Especially in the arts. I know people often feel arts are very elitist. People can feel very intimidated walking into that white cube gallery space and feeling like they don't belong there. And, I've felt those feelings too. But last year I did a project with the Vancouver Art Gallery, and I painted murals inside the rotunda of the third floor. And, first of all, I'm bringing this sort of lowbrow art into this really esteemed public institution. And it was in tandem with a show involving photographers from India. And the fact that I had access to that space, and I was in that space seeing other work by Indian artists from around the world, I felt so represented. I felt so visible. I felt like I have the ability to do this. And now I've been speaking with a Black artist in Vancouver who has an opportunity to work with the VAG. And she told me, Sandeep, I never envisioned myself in this space until I saw your work. And now I feel like I can do this. And so it really comes down to just having that access to these spaces and, being seen, being heard. And I think a lot of arts organizations are really looking at themselves now during the pandemic and seeing, where are our blind spots? And, some organizations are better at admitting where their blind spots are, and so it just takes looking at those blind spots, figuring out, who are we not paying attention to and who are we not supporting and who are we not giving access to? How do we change that? But how do we do it in an authentic way? Because I think sometimes BIPOC artists can feel very tokenized, like, oh, I just checked that box off for that organization. Like, did they want me for my work or did they want me because I fill a little box for them? And so, I think things are changing, and I think people are really trying their best to be more inclusive. It's going to take time, and that's the thing. Change doesn't happen overnight. Change takes time if we're going to do it right. And I have faith in these institutions and these galleries and these spaces that change will come and, access will be there.
Yeah. So Claire, I know the work of the Prosperity Project, those are long-standing issues. The issues aren't new. But the issue of representation and being able to see yourself in these spaces, the stakes are pretty high as women are leaving the workforce because of the pandemic and, setting back gains in terms of labor rights and privileges, decades. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of old problems but new approaches, especially related to inclusion and intention?
Well, I think inclusion, what's been said by the two speakers previous, is so important, and what Lila was saying as well, is when you are designing anything, you have to be thinking about who's it for and how do you make sure that everyone's included. And we've had a lot of discussions around the table as we look, for example, at the survey to say, how do you get a survey into communities that are often underserved and underrepresented? Because the normal channels may not be what you can use. And this is something that when we're dealing with, for example, business, we say you can't look for people from different backgrounds through your normal channels. You have to expand your channels. You have to look at where they are. And then when you bring them in, you can't simply carry on as you've always carried on, because intentionality means you have to change the way you do business in order to include everybody who's coming in. And so as we go through the Prosperity Project and looking at the different aspects, you have to think about that inclusivity and, as everyone has said, the access. How do people get access? How do people who have been underserved get access to good jobs? And that's what women want. They want good jobs. How do they get access to the training that's been promised? Because that is so important. If you've been in a part-time job or you've been in a job which is low pay, how do you take opportunities for getting the training that you need to be able to move into different areas? And I just give you a quick example from my past experience. Training program was set out, it was for Indigenous, but the training was done in areas that were far away from where the women were. There was no childcare and there was no transportation. And we said to them, well, look, you're not getting the women. If you really dig deep, you'll see why, because they can't access the programs. So provide childcare, take the program place closer to the community, and provide transportation, and then you'll be able to get training. So you have to think about all of those and how those voices can be included, because many voices are not as strong as others, and so they need that encouragement and that support to be able to speak up and say what needs to be said.
Mm-hmm. So, Lila, I think about your work and how one of the major coping mechanisms for people during the pandemic has been getting in touch with nature. And access to nature has been a key issue. Not everybody has it, right? So what are your thoughts on intentionality and inclusion in light of what we've heard so far?
Yeah, I first just want to absolutely echo everything that's already been said around inclusion and accessibility. And I think that is something that is definitely really difficult in youth organizing, because any of the youth organizing we do is often really inaccessible, and you do have to be really intentional about making it accessible to as many people as possible. And just the number of meetings and the workload, and like whether parents are okay with it and they're missing school and all this just really adds up. And I think what we try and work on as much as possible with being intentional and accessible is just removing as many barriers as we possibly can, and really just providing a space for everyone to plug in and for everyone to join in, even if they can't commit the same amount of time or can't come to the same amount of meetings or whatever that may be. I think just having an opportunity for everyone to get involved in whatever capacity they can bring, and just respecting that people do have different capacities to bring to organizing work or to any kind of work, and just allowing space for that is something that's really important. And then also to your point on nature, Sabrina, I think absolutely one of the biggest things I think around the climate crisis is just people's disconnect from the natural environment, and how much it impacts us as humans. And I think because we are just so out of touch with the earth and with the way that our natural environments work, we don't realize how much harm we're doing to them. And so I think the pandemic has been a really great opportunity for some people to be able to reconnect with nature, be able to spend more time outdoors, but it's definitely not something that's accessible to everyone. And I think that does need to be a huge part of climate action, is making public parks accessible and making natural spaces accessible, and really just revitalizing that connection to our natural world, and that understanding of the fact that we are so much a part of the natural world that we live in, and our actions are so interconnected with our earth and nature.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lila. I want to jump in with another question that was framed here. A lot of what I'm hearing here, there's lots of things around neighborhood, our personal lives, our friends, our families, and how we're showing up. What lessons can you take from that space of either feeling visible on a small level, opening up those access areas, and bring them into where our institutions live? There was a question a little while ago around, are you guys worried about our democracy because of what's happening down south? And I'd like to reframe that to all of you of being like, what can we learn from a local level that we'd want to share or want to bring into our bigger institutions?
I can start with that because I've worked in some of those bigger institutions. To say one of the things I think we can really learn is that you need to listen to what people are saying out there and not assume you can speak for other people. As a politician, or as a woman who has, been into certain areas, I can't profess to speak for all women. We have to be able to open that space for voices to be heard and brought into the policy making, because a lot of policy that's made is not reflective of what the true needs are out there, and all the implications are not thought through. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to say institutions can learn a lot by how communities open up space, how they engage, and how you can bring that into better policy making that has the kind of results that can create the change that everybody here is looking at, and that are doing in their own space, that governments need to be able to do that as well. And we see that not happening in the US, for sure, big time.
I can go next if you folks don't mind. I think it's what I've learned. It's relationships is the exercise of building trust. And trust is crucial. I think that's one of the lessons that I hope institutions pay attention to. The loss of trust in many institutions, including our government, has led to apathy. And what I've learned locally is when we work with integrity, I actually ran for elections back in 2018. And one of the first things that I did after the elections were done was to go knock on doors to thank people for coming out to vote. And everyone looked at me and said, no one does that. What are you doing? And I'm like, but I miss you. And I just wanted to share my, experiences running. I lost, but, I'm still around. And that led to so many doors open because people trusted me. And people will call me when issues happen in the community. And I became a tool of the community's expression of what challenges came ahead. And I also helped build capacity in our youth and other folks to be able to take on those fights and struggles as well. So an important lesson that I want to share with everyone else is the crucial need to build trust, and always remembering that, some of these relationships are going to last forever, or as long as you're in that community. So it's crucial to take the time to build those relationships, to build trust so that people could work together. South of the border, we all see what's happening. The lack of trust, the lack of leadership has caused devastating results with almost over 200,000 deaths related to COVID. So we see the impact of not doing that important groundwork.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Claire and Waleed have said so far. And it's also that idea of there's such a huge disconnect between us, the people, and the people who are making decisions for us. And, when you don't feel heard over and over and over again, it can lead to real apathy, and then how do you affect change when everyone's apathetic? And so there has to be trust. That trust has to be there, that trust that people are listening to us, people are looking out for our best interests. If we don't like what someone is doing, we have the power to change that.
Milo.
Yeah, for sure. I'll just jump in and completely agree with everything that all the other panelists have said, but especially you, Sandeep. I think that absolutely, I think that politicians do get their power from people and from people's votes. And we are politicians' bosses. And I think that there is such a disconnect between people who are in politics and positions of power and the people that they're meant to serve. And I think that political spaces and institutional spaces are often just so inaccessible to a lot of ordinary people, and especially people who are most impacted by a lot of the crises we're facing right now. And so I absolutely think politics needs to be way more accessible to anyone, and anyone who's interested in anyone who wants to get involved. And I think also that politicians and people who are in power need to listen when people are showing up in thousands in the streets, and when people are demanding for change, and when people are showing up to council meetings or doing delegations or starting petitions or whatever it may be. I think a lot of time that just gets ignored or that gets brushed aside. But I think that we also just need to build more people power and build more energy around the idea that we give politicians their power, and we give these institutions and these people who seem so powerful, that power comes from us, and that power comes from people. And I think that is something that can really energize people and make them want to create change. And I think especially in the US with the election coming up, in BC with a snap election that's been called a month from now, I think we absolutely need to mobilize people around getting people elected who are going to listen to the people that they serve.
Thank you all. In light of giving everyone power here, I want to make sure that we give 15 minutes to all of you in a breakout room. I meant to give that to our little tech host privately, and instead I announced it to all of you. So with that, we wrote in our kind of opening of what this event was, it was like, what is the recipe that turns advocacy into movements? And what I'm hearing is there's neighborhood, there's family, there's money, there's showing up, there's feeling visible. So I on my side have written my laundry list. We'd love for you to go into breakout rooms and be like, what is that ingredient that's inspiring you that you've heard from all of our speakers? So if Renee, our tech host, could send you all, I want to thank all our speakers. You will come back with us as we all share what Adriana, our fantastic graphic facilitator, has recorded. So for now, head off to breakouts, and then we'll see you all back just before we wrap for some final thoughts. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
You may have to look for a button that says go to breakout rooms in order to go there, where a facilitator will be there to greet you and you can chat with some folks. Again, if you want to head to a breakout room, go ahead and push a button. It should be somewhere on your screen. If not, this is kind of time to chill. So this is kind of, going backstage for a few minutes. Sabrina and I will chat, and I'm just going to congratulate you, Sabrina, on what a fantastic job you did. Fantastic questions. Our panelists were amazing.
No, they were so good.
Good. So many thoughts. I literally have a laundry list of like, these are my ingredients.
Well done. Yeah, they went together so amazingly, and they had such like distinct perspectives, and there was like enough overlap, not too much. Like that, they were very generous with their responses too.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so the folks who are here, if there's a button for you to go to, you're assigned.
Just to say, you really are wonderful people. Thank you so much. I'm off again now.
Thank you, Shirley.
Love you all.
Love to you as well. All right, the room is, this Brady Bunch squares are going to start tumbling back in any second. Renee, do you have the power to then like make Adriana's drawing the biggest screen?
I do, absolutely.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're in that moment where everyone starts coming tumbling back into plenary. So we'll just give folks a minute since they do have to push those buttons. So great to see all your faces. Feel free to turn them on. It's nice to remember that democracy is about people, and we all just had a wonderful hour together today. Just like that. So we're just waiting for everyone to sort of tumble back in. We do lose people at about 1 o'clock because people have meetings to go to and stuff like that, but so great to see all of your faces and all of those who joined us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And waving. Just as folks come tumbling back in, I want to express my deep gratitude to Sabrina for hosting our conversation today, for inspiring who we should invite as panelists. I've learned a lot. I also want to spend a deep sense of gratitude to all of our panelists. Before I pass it over to our facilitator, maybe we can all wave and thank our panelists, and thank Sabrina for spending time with us, guiding us through some interesting conversations that we can take away.
My pleasure. It was amazing. Thank you, everyone.
And it's fantastic. And then, and also some gratitude to all of you. I hope you all had an interesting conversation in your breakouts. It's so good to join us. I hope you also realized who's not here in the room today. We started to talk about elections. We started to talk about those systems and things, and the need to change there and the connections there. And some of the folks who do that work were in your panels with you as well, and some of them weren't. So thinking about where we can take this as a next step for all of us, as well as an important kind of question to ask ourselves. But for now, Adriana, can I pass it to you as our graphic facilitator? We talked about arts and where we make ideas visual. So here we go. Can you walk us through it?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is, I hope, a good capture of what was shared. Thank you so much for generosity of all the speakers and the facilitator for bringing this forward. I want to focus on this idea of resetting, that even though we know we're facing a lot of issues right now, that stuck with me a lot, the idea that it is time to reset and that time to rethink our role in society and stand in our power and recognize that we do have power within a democracy. The importance of mobilizing youth and listening to youth, but also what was also shared by Claire about the importance of intergenerational collaboration so that those fights that have happened in the past are not left unrecognized. And there is something to learn from there. And within that, the arts are also a very important aspect, because within imagining new ways of being and new ways of inhabiting the world, we can create solutions and find innovation. But the big takeaway is that it definitely has to come as a system-wide change that really brings and centers the voices of those who are most affected by the issues that were shared today and that we know are happening all over the world, to ensure that there's true representation, that there is access to decision-making spaces, to remove those barriers to participation, and the most important one, building trust and strengthening relationships that are long-term. So that is it from me. And I'll be finishing this up and adding a few more things in the next day or two, and then send it over for everyone to see and keep.
Thank you, Adriana. So we'll be sending an email to all of you who joined us next week with this. And can I ask our folks at Public Square and perhaps my behind the scene tech magic folks, we have a question of when would the recording be available? Do we have an ETA for that? All right, I'm gonna give you guys a deadline of next Wednesday. We're just gonna name that. And that's when you all can, as our audience, can expect a follow-up email with this art, as well as the graphics that Walid shared with us, as well as throughout the chat, there was a set of links that were referenced during our chat. We'll also send that to all of you as well so that the event lives on. And not only will the event live on in that way, but next month, our Distant Not Disengaged is actually a fantastic continuation of this conversation, I think, because its title is Whose Voice? Reimagining Public Engagement. So we will continue this conversation of democracy and bring in more of those focus of that institution and that engagement with our government, especially since BC is now in a snap election. So thank you all for joining us in this session of Distant Not Disengaged. We hope to see you all in October. And our facilitators and our hosts and our panelists wave goodbye to folks as you exit. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a great conversation. I'm taking a lot, and I hope that you are as well. Again, Sabrina, I love you. Thank you so much.
I love you too, Jen. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Yeah, thank you. I really love it. It was such a, like, having all of you was just this magic conversation.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm going to do on Thursdays. That was awesome. Well done, Jen, Sabrina.
Thank you, Jen.
Well done, everyone. It was so nice to work with such a mega team.
Sabrina, your facilitation was like so great. You were just able to just kind of steer the conversation in a really nice way. So thank you.
Oh, good. Well, it was a magic panel. You guys were really good together.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Alice. Adriana, your drawing is beautiful. I don't know how you do that. Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. Thank you to the Distant Not Disengaged team. Mwah. We also love all of you. I got to talk in the no man's land. A really lovely little old lady named Shirley showed up, and she was like, the world's okay. I can sit back. This is lovely. And then she was like, this is most amazing conversation ever.
Oh,
And she expressed love to Renee, like all of us. Didn't she say, what did she say, Renee?
I remember her mentioning that she's so comfortable with seeing youth step up into this space so well that she feels safe to just let them do their thing because they got this. It was so sweet.
She was like, I love you guys. So that's why I came back into the space just all full of warm and fuzzies. But thank you all. We'll end the call and continue on our day.
All right.
Bye, everyone.